I saw my brother's wife smile before she pushed me off the boat. It wasn't panic or fear, it was rehearsed, like they'd planned this moment for years. A second later, the freezing water swallowed me whole, and their laughter disappeared into the wind. They thought I was dead. They thought they'd won. But what they didn't know was, I was watching. I was listening. And now I'm back. Not for revenge, but for truth. And when they look me in the eye again, I want them to feel the same fear I did when I hit that water. They held the anniversary on the deck of a private yacht off the coast of Santa Barbara, all shimmering lights and curated laughter. The sea was calm, the sun golden, the playlist suspiciously perfect. My mother wore her pearls, and my father's glass never seemed to empty. The photographer they hired darted from table to table, capturing every candid smile like a wedding planner on Adderall. To anyone watching, we were the picture of American familial success. Legacy money, Ivy League degrees, and a yacht just big enough to impress but not too big to be tacky. But even through the champagne buzz and the salt in the air, I could feel it. Something off. Offbeat, disjointed. Like a piano where one key is just slightly out of tune. I caught Thomas's eyes across the deck, just for a second. He was standing beside Melissa, his hand lazily looped around her waist, but it was his gaze that froze me mid-laugh. Not blank, not warm, calculated. There was a flicker of something I couldn't name then, but would later recognize for what it was. Detachment. Planning. That moment lingered longer than it should have, his eyes narrowing, her smile a second too wide. Then they turned, disappeared into the cluster of guests, leaving me with a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. Later that night, back in my cabin, I found it. A text, blocked number. No ID. Just 7 words. Check the will. They're hiding something. At first, I laughed. Honestly. Out loud. It sounded like something out of a pulp thriller or a bitter cousin's prank. But then, I didn't delete it. Something made me screenshot it and save it in a folder buried deep in my phone. Because deep down, some rotten little part of me already believed it. I'd felt it for years. Those tiny omissions, the careful ways my name disappeared from group emails, the way Thomas always emphasized my voluntary singleness or reminded people of the time I'd been passed up for tenure, always with a smile. Always with just enough plausible deniability to make me feel petty for noticing. The next morning, we took family portraits. I wasn't in most of them. "Oh, I thought you went below deck," Melissa said, brushing off my confusion when I noticed. "You were gone for forever." I hadn't been. I'd gone to the restroom, 5 minutes, maybe 7, just enough time to conveniently miss the shot they used for the centerpiece collage. It was subtle. Everything was subtle. A shadow here, a missed glass clink there. Thomas would share childhood stories that always ended with my failures. The dance recital I choked. The mathlete competition I quit. Always starting with, "Remember when Claire," and ending in awkward laughter. "I mean, no offense," he said one night at dinner, "but you've never really been the follow-through type, right?" I laughed along, because that's what you do. When you're in a family like ours, image is everything. Dissent is drama, and drama is weakness. But the real crack came 2 days later, and it wasn't subtle at all. Melissa was pacing the back deck on a call. Her voice was low, but the sea was quieter. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I wasn't trying very hard not to either. "I'm telling you, I handled him the same way. Clean, quick, no one suspected a thing. And this one? She's even easier. Trust me." Her voice snapped into a fake laugh as someone approached. I ducked behind the railing, my pulse thudding. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from clarity. She was talking about me. I should have gone to my parents. But what could I say? That my sister-in-law was vaguely threatening me on a yacht in the middle of a family celebration? That my brother kept looking at me like I was a number on a ledger? That I got a text that sounded like it came from an anonymous whistleblower? Instead, I did nothing. Or at least, that's how it looked. What I did was begin watching, listening, documenting. I backed up my phone, Took photos of financial paperwork left on the coffee table, Googled the name of the family lawyer, and looked for connections I hadn't noticed before. Every night I locked my cabin. Every morning I smiled wider, because something was coming. I didn't know what, but I knew this much. They weren't trying to cut me out. They were trying to erase me. It started small, the way poison always does. At first, it was just words, gentle, coated in honey, disguised as care. "Claire, you've been working so hard," my mother said one morning, her hand brushing my shoulder. "Maybe you should rest. You seem a little too sensitive these days." Too sensitive. That phrase lingered like smoke. It sounded like concern, but I knew better. It was the beginning of a story being built, one where I wasn't the reliable daughter or the respected doctor. I was unstable, fragile, someone who needed to be handled. At lunch, my nephew climbed onto my lap, proudly showing me a picture he'd drawn. The crayon lines were jagged but clear enough, a stick figure shoving another stick figure into the water. "That's Uncle Thomas," he said proudly, "pushing you off the boat." The table went silent. My father coughed. My mother's fork clinked against her plate, and then Thomas's hand darted out, crumpling the paper before anyone could study it. He laughed, too loud, too sharp. "Kids, right? Always making up stories." I wanted to say something, to ask him why the drawing had felt so familiar, so raw. But my nephew's wide eyes told me not to. He didn't understand, but he had seen. That night, I decided to call the police. It sounded ridiculous even to me, but I needed someone to know, someone to believe me. I didn't get the chance. An hour later, Melissa knocked on my cabin door with her phone in her hand. "Look," she said, pressing play on a video. It was me, shoving her. At least, that's what it looked like. A grainy clip from one of the yacht's cameras, replayed at just the right angle to make me the aggressor. Melissa stumbled, clutched the railing, and looked terrified. My face, frozen on screen, twisted with what looked like rage. "Accidents happen," she said softly, locking eyes with me. "But sometimes people see what they want to see. Maybe you should be careful." The threat was clear. She left without waiting for my answer. By then, the whispers had grown louder. My parents exchanged looks when I spoke. Thomas never raised his voice, never accused me directly, but always framed things so the family doubted. "She forgets things," he said once. "She's always been absent-minded. Remember when she lost that grant? Remember when she misplaced Dad's cufflinks?" It was insidious, each memory twisted until I questioned if I was imagining everything. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe it really was all in my head. But I wasn't imagining what came next. I found out through a mistake, a carelessly discarded draft of legal documents tucked under a stack of magazines in the lounge. My signature was at the bottom, neat and convincing, except I'd never signed it. It was a transfer of power of attorney. With that piece of paper, Thomas could access every account, every asset meant for me. The ink wasn't even dry. I confronted him in the hallway, heart pounding. "What the hell is this?" I hissed, waving the document in his face. He didn't flinch. He smiled, that same calm, steady smile he always wore. "You've been so stressed lately, Claire. You probably just don't remember signing it." Gaslighting, neat and tidy. A noose I could feel tightening around my neck. 2 nights later, it happened. Melissa handed me a glass of champagne, her smile too sweet, her hand lingering too long as she pressed it into mine. I remember the bubbles rising, the cold fizz against my lips, and then darkness. When I woke, the night air was sharp and cruel. My body was heavy, my limbs numb. I was on the deck, the sound of waves slapping against the hull. Thomas's hands were on my shoulders, guiding me toward the railing. "I'm sorry, Claire," he whispered. "You were always too good at making people believe you." The shove came fast, merciless. My body hit the water with a crack that stole my breath. I sank, the salt burning my throat, my lungs screaming for air. Above, I saw Melissa, her phone raised, recording. Her face was unreadable, but I understood. She wasn't saving me. She was saving herself. Insurance, in case Thomas ever turned on her. The ocean swallowed me whole. For a moment, everything went black. The weight of betrayal pressed heavier than the sea itself. I thought that was the end, that they had erased me completely, but then my hand found something. A rope trailing from the side of the yacht, slick with seawater. Fingers clawed, grasped, refused to let go. I pulled myself up just enough to breathe, just enough to know one thing. I wasn't gone. Not yet. Cut scene. The sea didn't claim me. A small fishing boat did. The old man who pulled me from the water barely spoke English, but his hands were steady, his eyes kind. I woke up wrapped in a wool blanket, coughing salt, every bone aching. He never asked for details. Maybe he'd seen too many bodies the ocean had tried to keep. Maybe he knew some stories were too heavy to tell. By the time we reached shore, I had already made a decision. Claire Harrison was dead. If I wanted to survive, if I wanted to fight back, I couldn't be her anymore. The first thing I did was cut my hair. Jagged, uneven, clumps falling into the sink of a dingy motel bathroom. I stared at myself in the cracked mirror until I no longer recognized the woman looking back. Then I dyed it black, stripped the sun from my skin, and bought glasses I didn't need. I became Nora Bennett, financial consultant, widowed, mysterious but approachable. The kind of woman people trusted because she didn't ask too many questions. Weeks turned into months as I studied. Offshore accounts, real estate transfers, shadow corporations. I built Nora like an armor, piece by piece, until Claire's softness was gone. But at night, when sleep didn't come, I replayed that moment in the water, the cold, the silence, and Melissa's phone raised like a weapon. One evening, in the privacy of a rented studio apartment, I opened my laptop and searched their names. There it was, a video posted by a family friend. The Harrisons gathered in black, solemnly standing before a framed photo of me. My parents' faces lined with grief, but Thomas and Melissa, if you knew what to look for, looked triumphant. The camera lingered just long enough to catch Thomas leaning toward her, whispering. Melissa's lips curved, and then, almost imperceptibly, he mouthed, "Finally done." I froze the frame, staring at it until my vision blurred. My eyes burned, my throat raw, but I didn't cry. Not really. The tears fell soundlessly, but my face was blank. The grief had turned into something else, something sharper. Blood pooled where my nails dug into my palm, and I whispered into the empty room, "You think I'm gone, but I'm watching." Months later, Nora Bennett walked into an exclusive investment group meeting, the kind Thomas loved to haunt. My new identity was airtight, fake portfolio, background checks clean, money seeded into accounts. They saw what I wanted them to see. Thomas didn't recognize me. He shook my hand with the same charisma that fooled so many, and he smiled that politician's smile he wore in every magazine spread. "Nora," he said warmly, "welcome to the future." Every interaction was a test. Every laugh I gave him, every glance I let linger, it was all measured. He thought he was charming me. He thought he was winning. But Melissa was different. The first time our eyes met, I saw the flicker. Recognition. For a heartbeat, she froze. And then she smiled, wide and perfect, like she hadn't seen a ghost. Weeks later, at a dinner, she slipped. A glass of wine in hand, she leaned too close and whispered, "Careful, Claire." Then she tapped her glass to mine before walking away. She knew, and she wasn't telling. Instead, she watched me. From across rooms, from behind champagne glasses, her eyes tracked me like a cat studying prey. And then I realized she wasn't protecting Thomas anymore. She was waiting. It didn't take long to discover why. Thomas had grown careless. He was sleeping with her best friend, parading her in places just hidden enough to feel safe, but sloppy enough for Melissa to catch on. I didn't have to dig far. She practically handed me the evidence. A hotel receipt, a lipstick-stained shirt, a text thread left open long enough to be photographed. Melissa wasn't the only predator in this marriage. She was just the one who finally understood she'd been hunted too. The night she slipped into my car, uninvited, I almost laughed. She closed the door, crossed her legs, and stared at me like we were equals. "We both know he's going to burn us eventually," she said. "But what if we light the match first?" Her perfume was sharp, her lipstick darker than I remembered. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't asking for trust. She was asking for war. And for the first time since the water swallowed me, I considered saying yes. Melissa chose a hotel bar with no cameras in the corners and a bartender who knew when not to listen. She arrived in a black dress, her hair pinned high, her lips painted blood red. She looked like someone who had rehearsed survival 1,000 times and finally decided to improvise. "I don't want half," she said without greeting. "I want what I deserve, not to split scraps with a fool who thinks betrayal is a strategy." She sipped her drink slowly, her eyes cutting into me. "We can take him together?" I leaned back, studying her. The part of me that still bled at the thought of being shoved into the ocean wanted to hate her, to walk away, to leave her drowning in the schemes she created. But another part, the colder, sharper part that had been born the moment I pulled myself up on that rope, knew she wasn't lying. Not entirely. She was selfish, but her selfishness aligned with my survival. "I don't trust you," I said. "You don't need to," she replied smoothly. "You just need to trust that I hate him more than I hate you." For the first time, Melissa felt less like a villain and more like a mirror. We were both bound by Thomas, both scarred by him, both waiting for a chance to reclaim something he had stolen. So I set the first trap. I invited Thomas to dinner the next night. All smiles, all admiration, like the eager investor he thought Nora Bennett was. Between dessert and whiskey, I slipped a small recorder under the table, and then I let him talk. "I'll admit," he chuckled, "Claire was always smarter than me. People liked her, but she never understood family politics. And now? She's gone. If she wasn't dead already, I'd make sure of it, twice over if I had to." I kept my face still, my hand steady on the glass, even as my nails bit into my palm. He didn't even hesitate. He didn't even lower his voice. The recorder caught every word. Days later, the first file reached the district attorney's office through an anonymous email. More followed: bank transfers, offshore accounts, insider trades. A puzzle slowly piecing itself together. The police didn't storm in immediately. They watched, waiting for him to hang himself with his own rope. And then came the perfect moment. Thomas was being honored at a gala, another plaque for his wall of illusions. The room glittered with wealth, the kind of place where applause drowned truth. He stood at the podium, hand pressed against his chest, eyes glistening with rehearsed humility. And then the screens behind him lit up. The video played, the one showing him shoving me off the yacht. Gasps echoed across the hall. People clutched pearls, covered mouths, whispered in horror. But here was the twist inside the twist. That video wasn't the original. It wasn't Melissa's shaky recording. It was mine. Altered, sharpened, spliced to make him undeniable. In reality, Melissa had filmed, but I had taken that footage and bent it into a weapon, sculpted it until even Thomas couldn't defend himself. I stood in the shadows at the back of the room, my pulse steady, my expression unreadable. Thomas froze at the podium, his carefully woven mask unraveling thread by thread. He shouted, denied, accused. But no one was listening anymore. The jury of public opinion had already delivered its verdict. And then I felt it, eyes on me. Melissa standing only a few feet away, her expression unreadable. She didn't look shocked. She didn't even look satisfied. She looked curious. Later, in the dim light of a deserted corridor, she caught up with me. Her heels clicked against the marble as she stepped into the shadow where I waited. "You did it," she whispered. Her face was calm, but her voice cracked on the edge of something raw. "Not for me. Not for you. For him." She tilted her head, searching my face for something I wasn't offering. Then she leaned closer, her breath warm against my ear. "I don't want to win," she said softly. "I just want to live." And for the first time since the night I drowned, I believed her. The gala roared behind us, chaos unraveling in waves. But in that quiet space, it felt like the world had narrowed down to a single choice: whether I would let Melissa live in my war or die in his. I didn't answer her, not yet. The family meeting was supposed to be private, a quiet gathering in the library of my parents' estate with velvet curtains drawn and the air thick with mahogany and old secrets. But nothing about that night was quiet. I arrived not as Nora, not even as Claire, the daughter who had once laughed in that room, but as something in between, a specter carrying evidence in a leather folder. My parents sat stiffly at the head of the long table. Thomas leaned back with feigned ease, and Melissa hovered near the door like she was already halfway gone. I placed the folder in the center and opened it with deliberate calm. Copies of bank transfers, records of shell companies, the real will that had been hidden, naming me as primary heir. And finally, the recording of Thomas bragging about making sure I'd stay dead if I wasn't already. Silence stretched, broken only by the hiss of the fireplace. My father's hand trembled as he reached for one of the documents. My mother gasped. Thomas's face drained of color before it twisted into fury. "You bitch!" he snarled, slamming his fist against the table. "You don't get to come back and ruin me. You don't get to take what's mine." "Yours?" I asked, my voice steady. "It was never yours. You stole. You lied. You killed." He lunged at me, but Melissa stepped between us. For a moment, I thought she was shielding me, but then his hand cracked across her face, sending her stumbling back against the wall. Gasps filled the room. That was his mistake. The moment the mask shattered completely. Before I could move, the door burst open. Detectives entered, badges flashing, voices sharp. They'd been waiting for proof of violence, and Thomas had just delivered it. He fought, cursed, but the cuffs snapped around his wrists like fate itself had been waiting. As they dragged him out, his eyes burned into mine with a promise. This wasn't over. But the deeper cut came after. My parents, pale and trembling, stared at me with something between regret and resignation. My mother spoke first. "We knew," she whispered. "We always knew he was jealous of you, but we thought he would grow out of it, that if we just gave him time, he'd change." I felt my chest collapse in on itself. All those years I thought I was imagining the bias, the favoritism, the subtle wounds. I wasn't. They had seen. They had chosen silence. "You knew," I said, the words jagged, broken. "And you let him do this to me." Tears prickled my eyes, but they didn't fall. I wouldn't give them that. "I died for you once. I won't do it again." Melissa slipped out during the chaos. By the time the police searched for her, she was gone, along with several accounts that had been under Thomas's name. She left nothing behind but the faint perfume of survival and a note on my windshield. We were never allies, just convenient enemies. Thomas faced charges: fraud, embezzlement, attempted murder. The tabloids feasted, the networks spun it, and the story caught like wildfire. My image, grainy and ghost-like, plastered on every headline. They called it the resurrection case. The public loved it. A dead woman who wasn't dead, an heir returning to expose her brother's corruption. They cheered for justice, but I knew better. Justice wasn't what happened in that library. Justice had been buried long before. My parents, stripped of their pride, leaned on me now. My father's hand shook when he reached for mine. My mother whispered apologies into the silence, but I had no comfort left to give. "I'm not her anymore," I told them as I stood. My voice was steady, final. "Claire Harrison died the night your son pushed her into the sea." I left them there, two frail figures drowning in the weight of their own silence. Outside, the world burned with headlines and hashtags, strangers debating whether I was a hero or a liar, whether my family deserved ruin or redemption. But in the quiet of my own heart, I knew the truth. Winning had never been about inheritance or reputation. It had been about survival, and survival always came with a cost. The world knew me now by another name, not Claire, not Nora, but by the title of a book that climbed the bestseller lists in a matter of weeks. The Woman Pushed to Sea. Under that pseudonym, I wrote everything I had lived through, stripping away the polished lies of my family and laying bare the mechanics of gaslighting, betrayal, and silence. I didn't write for revenge, though people assumed I did. I wrote because truth had nearly drowned with me, and if I stayed silent, the water would win. The book tour was relentless. Podcasts, late-night interviews, conference stages. People devoured the story, not just for its shock value, but because it mirrored their own private wars. At every signing, strangers whispered confessions. My sister did the same. My parents never believed me either. I thought I was crazy until I read your words. At one women's conference in Chicago, under the harsh glare of stage lights, an audience member stood during the Q&A. She was older, silver in her hair, but her voice trembled like a child's. "If you had the choice," she asked, "would you still be Claire?" The room stilled, hundreds of faces watching, waiting. I smiled, not bitter, not triumphant, just free. "I'm not Claire anymore," I said slowly. "I'm not even Nora. I am the woman who survived." Applause erupted, but I barely heard it. I was thinking of the salt water in my lungs, the rope that had saved me, the night I let go of everything I had been. Freedom wasn't about winning, it was about becoming. Months later, I poured that freedom into something tangible. With the royalties from my book and the relentless energy survival had forged, I built a digital platform dedicated to survivors of toxic families, not just another forum filled with anonymous posts, but a structured network with counselors, legal advisors, and workshops for rebuilding identity. We called it the Phoenix Project. Every day, I watched people from around the world share their scars, lifting each other in ways I wished I'd been lifted. And in those moments, I understood what victory really was. Not watching Thomas rot in prison, not seeing Melissa disappear with her stolen money. Victory was creating something that outlived the pain. Then, one night, my inbox lit with a message from an untraceable account. The subject line was blank. The body contained just one sentence. "Don't forgive me, but thank you for not killing me." Melissa. I stared at the words for a long time. No apology, no attempt at redemption, just acknowledgement. She knew I could have exposed her alongside Thomas, destroyed her completely, but I hadn't. Maybe because I wanted her to live with what she had done. Maybe because, like me, she was already sentenced to carry it forever. I closed the laptop without replying. Some ghosts don't need exorcising. The final reckoning came quietly, not in a courtroom or a gala, but on a beach at dusk. The tide rolled in soft and steady, the same ocean that had once tried to bury me now, humming like a lullaby. I carried a single white flower. I didn't think about who it was for. My younger self, the woman I used to be, or the pieces of me I'd shed along the way. I just let it fall, the petals spinning in the current before drifting out to sea. For the first time since that night, the water didn't terrify me. It was no longer a grave. It was just water. I stood there, barefoot in the sand, breathing in the salt and freedom, when a voice cut through the evening air. "You don't think this is over, do you?" The voice was low, familiar, laced with venom I thought I'd buried. My body stiffened, the hair at my neck rising. Slowly, I turned. Thomas. Or maybe just his shadow. And suddenly, I realized survival wasn't a single victory. It was a war that kept moving, reshaping, demanding, but this time I wasn't afraid, because this time I was already reborn.